So on the channel, we've seen bike bags on racks, bike bags on frames, seat bags on handlebars, and now racks on stems. That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you're into the non-competitive side of cycling, riding party pace, and living the supple life you have found your people, hit that subscribe button. So I saw this interesting piece of bike gear on the Radavist a couple weeks ago, and by some strange stroke of luck, the person that owns that bike and that rack actually lives in town and reached out to me to see which bags would work on that rack. So seizing the opportunity, I had a couple of hours with the bike, trying different bags on the rack, and just getting a first impressions of this kind of new potential trend in bike packing rack. This rack in particular is made by a small company called August Cycles. I believe they're based in the UK. And to my knowledge, this is a bit of a one-off, although they do have plans to bring it to production. This idea isn't completely new. I know that Rick Hunter from Hunter Cycles has his own version of this called the Cowcatcher. And to keep things completely above board, the folks at August Cycles assured me that they reached out to Hunter Cycles and shared their plans about creating a production model of a similar style rack. The rack pictured here is attached to a bike by another interesting small maker, in this case, Tomy Cycles. I believe they're based out of Austin, Texas. And this is, of course, a grab bike with a super cute and interesting rack. Amazingly, this whole package with the front rack and the custom mini rear rack and the small bag weighed in at a pretty scant like 22, 23 pounds. And when you strip everything off of it and just have the bike, it actually dips below that 20-pound mark, which is pretty remarkable given, you know, the size of the tires. Interesting build overall, but we're here to talk about the rack. This design is made specifically to work with this very specific stem and spacer combination. As you can see, it locks onto the steer tube with a single bolt, and the package as a whole looks pretty dang sleek. Smooth welds, and it has that kind of clean, old school, almost like a nice quill stem vibe. The rack is made out of 4130 chromoly, and it's all fillet braze construction, and the welds looked super clean and smooth. I didn't get a chance to remove the rack and weigh it, so apologies to the weight weenies out there. So initially, the owner of the bike wanted to know if it would work with a bag like this one. This is a bag we've reviewed on the channel. This is the ILE Inside Line Equipment Mini Pro Tour Rack. I gave it the good college go, and unfortunately, a little bit too much bag for the rack. A bag like that definitely requires a little bit more of a platform to securely support it. I also tried the rack with a small Paradise style bag. In this case, this is the Swift Zeitgeist, and it seemed to work pretty well. You could wrap these rear valet straps around the tubes and fiddle with the stabilizer cordage so it's held securely in the rack. Again, not the best case, but it is passable with this. One reason you might want to use a rack in a combination with a bag like this is that it does provide more standoff in the handlebars, so it makes that flat part of the handlebar more usable. So what I came to in its current form, the rack definitely would work well as a support or a dry bag or a bike packing style sausage roll. But currently, even with all the bags I own, you definitely have to get something custom fit to work with a rack like that. As it stands, the owner is using it with a Z-Packs bag of some sort to carry camping gear and light loads. So if stem racks are the next big thing, what are some pros and cons of this style of rack? I think one big pro is that it solves the problem of if you have a gravel bike with a carbon fork and it doesn't have the strength or the ability to support a rain-enduring rack, this might be a workaround. Another big pro is that even if you just run it with bike packing sausage bags, it provides a generous standoff, so you once again can reclaim that flat position on the handlebar. Another huge pro is that because it is such a secure connection, there's no risk of putting a bag in there and having the whole rack rotate or somehow dip down over rough terrain, because it's bolted down with 4 bolts to your stem. Those are the foreseeable pros I see, but with this design, there also comes some cons. Probably the first one that a lot of you are going to point out is how much weight can you actually put on a rack like this. Again, this is just postulation here, but I do think a rack like this would work best as a support to kind of bulky but not very heavy gear. Probably don't want to put more than 15 or 20 pounds on there. Could potentially break the bolts, but also just would make handling really funky with the weight up that high. Another con, speaking about having the weight up high, at least in this particular design where you see the small platform, it actually is pretty tall on top of the tire. If I personally were to look into a rack like this, I'd want one that would dip a little bit lower, bringing that center of mass of whatever load I'm carrying a little bit lower down. I think this would greatly improve handling, as well as giving you a little bit more real estate, potentially if you wanted to run lights on your handlebars. I know the Hunter Cycles variation of this rack has some adjustability in the platform, so you can angle it down to make it better fit your load, but also flat pack it. I think that would be a cool feature to see in future stem racks, if you will. Another big and probably most immediate con of racks like this is going to be the cost. As it stands, racks like this are generally made by small makers in small quantities, custom builds, lots of labor. So it's gonna be pretty expensive, and you're probably gonna have to buy a stem to go along with the rack. I'm not quite sure about stem bolt spacing, if there's a universal standard. I highly doubt it. It is the bike industry after all. So chances are you're going to be paying for a small batch rack and have to buy the mating stem with it. I do think a design like this has lots of potential, and I'm aware of at least like 2 or 3 other folks working on a very similar design or concept at least. So I think we will see more stem racks in the future. Whether it's going to hit mass adoption or come down to more affordable price points, or if a larger brand will also attempt to build a rack like this, time will tell. But I do think it's an interesting bit of bike tech and gear to keep an eye on. So I'm curious, what do you guys think of this stem rack technology? Are there any pros or cons that I miss? Is it too complex? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in more ways to mount things to your bike, you definitely want to subscribe. Right now, I'm currently reviewing 2 racks. One is the Old Man Mountain Sherpa rack and the Thule pack and pedal rack. These are both racks designed to work on bikes without eyelets. I'm going to talk about how easy it was to install, how easy it is to move from bike to bike, and kind of general impressions of how well it carries a load. So you don't want to miss that. If you found this content helpful or entertaining, definitely consider supporting the channel. Check out our merch store where you can buy all sorts of goofy stickers and postcards and lots of good supple party pace merch. As always, keep the supple side down.